The Durand Canning Company canned peas and beans from 1922 through 1977. It was located on the northern part of Durand and was serviced by the Milwaukee Road Railroad for both supplies and shipping. In early spring, the soil in the fields was tilled in preparation for planting. This removed dirt clods which can hinder the seed's contact with the soil and delay or interfere with seedling emergence. It also reduced weeds that could compete with the plant growth. It was determined through field soil testing if additional nitrogen was needed for a given field. Here you see a trailer tank containing liquid anhydrous ammonia that provided this nitrogen fertilizer. The liquid anhydrous ammonia was loaded into tanks on either side of a specially configured tractor. The tractor operators set the attached injector rig to the required depths and flow rates for either peas or beans, then proceeded with the application. Once the fields were prepared, seeds were brought into the field for planting by truck. The seed variety was selected and purchased from seed vendors to produce the best yields for Wisconsin growing seasons. Although the Keystone peas shown here were primarily a winter pea, they could also be used as a spring pea. The planters used included a dry fertilizer dispenser. The fertilizer formulation was selected to optimize growth for the planted crop type. The planters used had 2 tanks that were loaded with the dry fertilizer. Then the seed hopper was carefully loaded by hand to reduce seed damage. Care was taken to not pour the seed in from a great height above the hopper, thus aiding in reducing seed damage. These planting machines planted 4 rows at a time. The corrugated dry fertilizer tubes and the black seed dispensing tubes can be seen leading to each of the 4-row planters. The planters were set to the proper depth, and in one continuous flow, they first dug the furrow with the disc, as you can see on the right, then dispensed a measured amount of fertilizer into the furrow, planted the seeds using a specially shaped planting disc, and then were covered back up with the soil by a rubber wheel. The planter tractor operator was trained to control the speed of planting to assure minimal seed damage and proper planting. The seed planting rate was set so the plants would provide the highest yield per acre. Throughout the growing cycle, moisture was monitored. When needed, water was pumped from previously dug wells, which fed large field sprinklers that moved around the field at a metered rate to cover the entire crop. These sprinklers were set to disperse water at a rate in combination with the sprinkler movement around the field to ensure the vegetable plants got the right amount of water. The first crop planted by the company in late spring was peas, and soon the blossoms started to produce pods in which the peas would grow. The growth in each field was monitored and a harvesting schedule plan built. When the harvest time was right, the pea plants were cut and channeled into rows. The large harvesters quickly followed to harvest the freshly cut peas. The tractors pulling these large harvesters were set slightly to one side of the harvesters. This allowed the harvesters to gather up each row of the freshly cut peas. Once gathered into the harvesters, these units separated the peas from the plants and the pods. These peas were collected into hoppers, and the pea plants and pods dispersed back onto the fields as fertilizer. Once the hoppers were full, flatbed trucks fitted with special containers pulled up next to the stopped harvesters. The hoppers, which were full of peas, extended over to this container. The peas were then poured into the special containers on the truck. These pea trucks then drove to the canning factory, where they were maneuvered into the receiving building. In the receiving building, the truck stopped on a truck-size scale bed. The weight of the fully loaded trucks was then recorded. After the peas were unloaded, the truck would return to that scale and be weighed empty. The difference calculated was the poundage of that pea load. As a measure of quality and grade, a sample from each load was crush tested for tenderness and that information recorded for that particular batch. From the receiving bin, the peas would move through several cleaning machines. The first removed the majority of stems, bugs, and field debris from the coarse cleaning that was done by the harvesters in the field. The second set of machines conducted the first of several washings of the peas. The final set of machines in the receiving processing area provided the peas a final rinse, and they were piped in water to the next stage of the canning process. The peas would then be deposited onto picking conveyors located in the adjoining building. Here, pickers would visually inspect the product run and remove any remaining foreign materials or bad peas to assure the peas moving into the canning room were of the best quality. In preparation for canning, a mixture of salt and water was mixed into a brine solution. Meanwhile, the peas moved from the picker conveyor tables into holding bins. At a specific controlled rate, the peas were transferred into a blancher that sterilized and pre-cooked the peas. In an adjoining building, workers loaded the type of can sizes that were to be filled with the pea product. The metal cans, in this case they were number 10 cans, moved up a magnetic conveyor and then rolled over into the canning room. In the canning room, the pre-cooked peas were fed into a can-filling machine under careful supervision, where they were put into the cans which had been cleaned and sterilized with steam. As the cans, now filled with peas, exited the filler, a shot of the previously prepared brine solution was squirted into each can as it passed. From here, the cans moved into a topper machine where the can lid was affixed. At this point, the sealed cans were grouped and manually placed into cooking pot cages by strappers. Each cooking pot contained multiple layers of cans. A number of these cooking pot cages were then lowered into massive pressure cookers outside the building. These pressure cookers executed the final cooking and sterilization process. This ensured a long shelf life and preserved freshness. The steam for the massive pressure cookers was produced by large boilers. These boilers also fed the blanchers and the can sterilizers. Once the pressure cooking was complete, the cans in the cooking pot cages were hoisted over and slowly cooled by moving them through a cooling bath which was fed by the canning factory's own well. Once cooled, the cans, each having a lid marked with a special tracking number set, were loaded onto wooden pallets and stored in an on-site warehouse until sold. As the pea harvest and canning season was coming to a close, Canning Company field workers had already been hard at work planting bush snap beans. The same field preparation and equipment was used, but adjusted for bean planting. With the aid of summer rains and the field sprinklers, which you were shown previously, the snap beans grew quickly. As with pea plants, the field beans were monitored and a harvesting schedule plan was drawn up. To reduce weeds and keep the bean plants healthy, pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides between the rows were selectively used. When the snap bean sizing was just right, special bean harvesting tractors were brought in. These harvesting tractors were attached to a special collection trailer. The rows of field beans were planted in such a way that 2 rows could be harvested at once. As with pea harvesting, the experienced harvester tractor operators controlled the speed to maximize collection with the least damage to the product. The snap bean harvesters worked by using large brushes to strip the entire bean plant. After removing much of the leaves, stems, and other debris, which was then dispersed back onto the field, a conveyor moved the snap beans into the special collection trailers which were pulled behind the harvester tractors. For transport, large trucks were then brought onto the field. These trucks would pull up next to the fully loaded collection trailers. Then, using hydraulics, the bins on the collection trailers would be lifted up and they would dump their bean collection into the truck. This process was repeated several times until the large transport truck was fully loaded. Once loaded, the trucks would then drive to the canning factory. As before, the snap bean trucks were first weighed fully loaded before making their way to the bean receiving and temporary storage area. At the storage area, bean trucks would back up and dump their beans into a large holding bin. These bins had a slow-moving feed conveyor at the bottom. Like with pea processing, once unloaded, the truck would drive back to the scale to be weighed empty, where the snap bean load weight would be calculated and recorded. Because of their long shape, the string beans were processed on a different set of machines in another part of the factory. Like with peas, a number of these first machines were dedicated to removal of unwanted stems, leaves, bugs, and other field debris. This machine used fans for a blow cleaning. These cleaners use both mechanical means to further remove unwanted debris and materials, as well as water to further clean the beans before canning. Following these cleaning stages, the beans were channeled onto conveyors. In almost all cases, the beans retained tough end stems at the very end of the beans. These machines nipped off these stems. The plant debris and cut off end stems, like most of the unwanted plant parts, were collected and either trucked to the county landfill or provided to farmers as animal feed. Snap beans were processed in two ways. They were either canned as whole beans, or they were channeled into rotating cutter machines to produce cut beans. In these rotating cutters, each long bean was cut into bite-sized pieces. When there was a whole bean run, the beans could be channeled into a special machine used to nip the ends off of the whole beans and then move them on up a conveyor. With either cut or whole beans, the final cleaning and quality control was done by a skilled set of pickers. Here you see the pickers working on a run of whole beans. From this point, the snap beans were conveyed into the same canning room where the peas were processed previously. Although some slight reconfiguration of the canning machines was necessary, the canning process was essentially the same. It should be mentioned that many snap beans, as well as peas, were canned in what are called number 3 cans. Here you see a warehouse where a worker is loading empty number 3 cans that will use rolling conveyor systems to feed them into the canning room. After the product is canned and stored in the warehouse, the next step is to sell the product. Once a sale is made, pallets of previously canned peas or beans were shipped directly to the buyer, where the buyers placed their own labels onto the cans. However, the Durand Canning Company also had their own name brand, which was affixed in this room. The Durand Canning Company also printed their own name brand labels. The Durand Canning Company name brand was called Dainty Miss and was always affixed to the highest quality product. Here you see a typical canning factory floor worker. The worker would take his own lunch and drink in a lunch pail, wear a hard hat, and steel-toed rubber boots. The rubber boots were essential due to the ubiquitous amounts of water on the floors and for protection against heavy objects. The Durand Canning Company was sold to Faribault Foods in 1977. Faribault Foods moved canning operations to other more modern facilities in the area. At this point, the Durand factory became a primary warehouse facility. As such, many of the buildings were demolished to provide additional space. This demolition included removal of the product receiving areas and the main canning room and cookers. Although the Durand Canning Company no longer exists, Many folks from Pepin County and surrounding areas remember working there during the summer growing and canning season or as full time employees. If you would like to learn more about the Durand Canning Company's history and how it operated through the years, check out the video History and Background of the Durand Canning Company.